This morning's prelude, the Ashokan Farewell, was the piece you probably recognized used by Ken Burns for his documentary, The Civil War. And it was the music that he chose as background for a letter written by a man named Sullivan Ballou. And Sullivan Ballou was a Union officer who was writing to his wife. And in it, he writes these poignant words: "Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me to you with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence could break. And yet, my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly on with all these chains to the battlefield." He died at the first Battle of Bull Run 1 week later. That letter was never sent. It was found in his trunk. But as I read and hear those words, there's nothing that puts me faster in the mindset of Memorial Day than hearing his letter. This weekend, we pay due homage to those who died for the cause of freedom for all. Yet, tacit in every Memorial Day observance, there always comes a question. How can the gift of freedom, given at the cost of others' lives, ever be repaid? How do you say thank you to someone who died before the prime of life? Today we are trying. We are trying to say thank you to those who have died in service to our country. No one has or ever can receive what is his or her due. But who are we if we don't make the effort? 2 weeks ago, we tried to say thank you to our mothers for giving us the gift of life. None of us finished the job, I don't think, because when you think about it, no truly great gift can ever be repaid. Last Sunday at the baccalaureate service we attended, the sermon was appropriately enough on the topic of gratitude. And in it, the speaker read a poem that was written by Billy Collins, one-time poet laureate. And Collins masterfully captures the feeling of inadequacy that inevitably comes with a big thank you. It's called The Lanyard, and I'm going to read it, but in the interest of time, I've abridged it slightly. The other day, I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. I was suddenly sent into the past, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I hear you laughing. Have you made a lanyard? Yes. I'd never seen anyone use a lanyard, or even wear one, if that's what you did with them. But that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life, and I gave her a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she said. And here is the lanyard I made at camp. And here I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift. Not the worn truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the two-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. Somehow, as we come together today to say thank you to those who died in service, I get the same sense that for some reason, some inexplicable reason, those who have died are saying the same thing to us. We're even. Yet that sense doesn't take away the God-giving longing that we have to prove ourselves worthy, and what a wonderful thing that is. The question is this morning, how have we done so far with the freedom we've been given? That's the introduction, so I hope you're still with me because I'm just starting now. So the question is, which kind? We might ask, because freedom comes in two forms, personal and spiritual. And the first form of freedom that I want to talk about is personal freedom, the freedom to pursue our individual goals, be it for money or status or success in any way we choose to define it. We know a lot about personal freedom. My cousin loved it more than anything else in the world. But he loved it too much, and he wanted too much of it. And ultimately, it ended up destroying him. After he finished high school, he headed for the army. But that stint didn't last long because he didn't like taking orders from anyone. And so because he didn't like somebody else telling him what to do, that hampered his freedom, and he went AWOL. I'm not sure too much about the details that followed that incident, but I know eventually he wound up at home and he found a job. He got one, but because he liked his freedom more than the demands of this particular employment, he quit. And so then he tried another job. 3 months later, he quit again, and the process repeated itself. At this point, he came to the conclusion that work interfered with his chosen lifestyle. So he went to find a wife who would support him. And believe it or not, he did. I met her. But this marriage lasted less than 6 months. By now, stress had begun to rob him of his feeling of freedom. So he started drinking, using drugs, etc. And subsequently, he got in trouble with the law. I know that he spent some time in jail, but beyond that, I do not have a clue as to what happened to him. We lost touch, and not that I tried that hard to stay connected. I really don't know where he is today. But how he loved his freedom. Yet, ironically, it was his love for his personal freedom which ultimately enslaved him. He was enslaved by his own free will. And in fighting so hard to keep himself free from responsibilities, he wound up not only handcuffed, but even soul-cuffed, if I can coin that expression. Yet the good news this morning is that there are two kinds of freedom available to us, and we, all of us, have the option of choosing that other kind, which is spiritual freedom. Spiritual freedom is ours whenever we choose to embrace freedom not for self, but from self. When we decide to put other people's needs first and to live for the glory of God. Harriet Tubman is one such example. I know about her because she was the first one that Julie ever wrote a report on in school, at middle school. And I learned at that time that when Tubman was close to 30 years of age, her brothers were about to be sold. And so she tried to persuade them to join her in escaping to Philadelphia. Both of them backed out. And so she crossed over into freedom on her own. And this is how she described her experience. When I found that I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. That was her description of personal freedom. Nothing at all wrong with it, except that it wasn't enough for her. Christ was calling her, as he calls to each of us, to find freedom in him. Spiritual freedom, the kind that comes alive whenever God plants it in our souls to use our personal freedom for the benefit of someone else. Harriet Tubman accomplished something very few slaves ever have. She voluntarily risked returning to the land of her enslavement for the purpose of rescuing others. She made this trip not once, but 13 times. And all told, she brought some 70 slaves to their freedom. Her nickname was Moses, and spiritually, she was one free woman. Spiritual freedom comes from the act of surrendering, from the conscious choice to give up so as to give to, and it results in being freed. Freed by Jesus Christ himself from the ever-threatening obsession with self. We know what that is. Freed from fears of inadequacy or inferiority, freed from the fear of failure, and ultimately freed from the fear of death. That's spiritual freedom. It means being freed for empathy and freed for service, freed to want to make sacrifice upon sacrifice upon sacrifice for someone else, and freed to be grateful for those very opportunities that allow us to do that. Who doesn't want that kind of freedom? Every day we make a choice. Are we going after personal or spiritual freedom? That's what concerned the Apostle Paul about the Galatians. For you were called, he said, to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love, become slaves to one another. See the paradox. We can choose personal freedom, and despite ourselves, we can wind up enslaved, or we can choose servanthood and be freed. Which shall it be? Someone once said, the wind of grace, the wind of the Holy Spirit is always blowing. It is for us to raise our sails. And so let us do just that. We came this morning to be reminded of the price paid on our behalf so that we might have freedom. Let us use it well so that those who have died can say with pride, we're even.